The next thing I'd like to talk about are the reduce and collect terminal operations compared and contrasted with each other. So terminal operations produce results in different ways, as we've seen. So we have reduce, we have collect, and these differences are actually quite important when we talk about parallel streams. For sequential streams, typically doesn't really matter. For parallel streams, it can make a big difference. And we'll cover that later, probably starting next time. And the things to remember to differentiate between reduce and collect is that reduce expects to be creating immutable objects. It expects to be working on immutable objects. It expects to be creating immutable objects. It wants these things to be immutable. And what does that mean? It means once they're created, their values can never change. So here's a very simple example. This is the factorial example, a variant that we've looked at before. And you're going to see how we can implement this using reduce. And you can find this example in the EX16 folder in my GitHub repository. So to do this, we're going to generate a range of longs from 1 to n. Let's say n is 4, just to make it fit on the slide. And so that's kind of what I'm showing here. We have a range of longs from 1 to n, inclusive. And then reduce is going to combine two immutable values, like two longs, and produce a new immutable value. And so if we were to walk through this step by step, you'd see what happens is that we start out with 1, and the initial value of this thing is 1 because we're doing multiplication, and 1 is the identity value, or it's the identity value for multiplication. So 1 times any value yields the value. 0 is the identity value for addition. 0 plus any value yields that value. So 1 times 1 yields 1. Next element, 2. 2 times 1 yields 2. Next value, 3. 3 times 2 is 6. Next value, 4. 4 times 6 is 24. So you can see we just kind of walk through there, and that's what the reduction of that range will yield as the result. And in a sequential program, it works kind of like that. In contrast, collect mutates an existing value. So whereas reduce expects something to be immutable and can't change, it's like diamonds, it's very hard to change or impossible to change. Collect mutates an existing value. So let's take a look at a simple example here. And this is going to be an example you can find in my EX14 folder. This is going to read the complete works of Shakespeare, which I have got in text form in a bunch of text files, one file per work. So one file per play. We're going to open up every single Shakespeare work. We're going to create essentially a list of all words in Shakespeare. So this particular regular expression will take the works of Shakespeare and split them by words. So we're going to end up essentially with a list of all the words in Shakespeare. And I think that all the words in Shakespeare is something like 600,000 words, give or take. We're then going to create a stream of those words. Now we now have a stream of all the works in Shakespeare. We're then going to go ahead and lowercase all the words. So capital H Horatio becomes the same as lowercase Horatio. That's probably not a good example, but there's other words that might be capitalized in some context and lowercased in others, like anon, great thing that means, I think, then. And so we'll have a stream of lowercased words, and then we're going to go ahead and collect the results into a hash set. And a hash set is basically a little helper class that I wrote, which is just a wrapper. I'm sorry, it's not something I wrote. A hash set is basically a set that uses hashing to implement the set. We could use a tree set as well, but what we're doing is we're collecting it into a set. What will collecting into a set do? Collecting into a set will end up with only the unique words of Shakespeare, because there'll only be one copy of each word. And so what this is illustrating is how, as collect is working, it's basically creating a hash set, and it takes each element in the stream and it accumulates it into that hash set. And by the time we're all done, we'll have a hash set which gets returned from collect and stored as a set, which will contain all the elements, all the unique elements, all the unique words in the complete works of Shakespeare. Yes, sir? We could also use to set. Yeah, great question. So we could put here to set instead of to collect hash set. The main difference would be, and I'll actually probably change this. I could probably change this to tree set, and then it would be different. So that's a great question, really good observation. That's a little bit verbose. I think I was just illustrating that you could use toCollection instead of something else. And when you use toCollection, you can give it the collection you want as a method reference, or a constructor reference in this case, which is the constructor for hash set. But yeah, that's a really good question. Yes, so the question is, can you specify the implementation you want? That's correct. If you use the toCollection factor method, you can tell it what kind of collection you want it to be collecting into. If you use toSet, it'll make a hash set. If you use toList, it'll make an array list. And you can't control those collections other than what they come by default. So therefore, they give you toCollection if you want to control the collection to take other than the default. Yeah, great question. Question? Yeah, good question. So the question here is, does this statement that collect mutates an existing value apply to all collections? Yes. When we get into collectors, probably won't get there today, but when we get to collectors later, you'll see how collectors create something called a mutable result container, which is typically a collection, but it could be something else, like an array list or a hash set or a tree map or whatever, and it collects things into that. That's correct. So they always mutate existing objects. I should probably say objects instead of values, but I was trying to be consistent with immutable value. So the main difference is reduce works on immutable values that can't change after they're set, whereas collect creates a mutable result container and then collects the elements in the stream into that through whatever means is appropriate, adding or inserting or whatever. So that's the end of the discussion that compares and contrasts reduce and collect for terminal operations.